Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve. Wait until you see this exchange between Jordan Peterson and a woke leftist politician. Not only is it entertaining, but it provides a masterclass on how to shut down the absurd hysterics of the woke left.
Martin Luther King's dream was that there would come a time when people would not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. How is today's identity politics consistent with that vision?
Jordan Peterson.
Well, I don't think it's consistent with that vision at all. I mean, the problem I have with identity politics as a mode of philosophical apprehension is that it's predicated on the idea that the appropriate way to classify people is by their group identity, in whatever fragmentary formulation that might take, in the multiplicity of ways that people can be divided into groups. And the classical postmodern, and I would also say Marxist way of viewing the world, even though those two things shouldn't be allowed together, they tend to be, is that group identity takes priority over individual identity, and I think that's precisely the opposite of what Martin Luther King was hoping for and working for. And I think it's unbelievably dangerous, because partly because when you assume that people should primarily be identified by their group, then you can also attribute group guilt to them by their group. And then things go downhill very, very rapidly. And we've had no shortage of evidence of that sort of thing happening, say, throughout the 20th century.
Now, what Jordan Peterson is getting at there is actually the confluence of two dynamics we need to be aware of. The more fundamental dynamic is a process that was actually predicted decades ago by the French sociologist Michel Maffesoli and his concept of Neotribalism. This is the notion that the world is slowly but surely moving away from liberal globalism and instead reorganizing around racial or regional or ethnic identities. So the world's basically fracturing. It's breaking up away from the old Cold War era, as well as the liberal international order that replaced the Cold War era. And so populations are increasingly reorganizing themselves around their own shared identity markers, such as nation, culture, custom, tradition, ethnicity, race. But there's a second dynamic to all of this, and that's a particularly leftist version of this retribalization. And it's what's more commonly referred to as identity politics or cultural Marxism. And this is where race and gender and sexuality are exploited by leftists as indicators of victimhood. Ever since the publication of Herbert Marcuse's essay on repressive tolerance back in the 1960s, race, gender, and sexuality for the radical left have been the dividing factor between two groups of people. One group is always considered the oppressor group, which of course in the West is the dominant white male heterosexual majority, whereas the other group is always considered the oppressed group, which is basically everybody else. And everything in society is supposed to evidence in some way, no matter how insane, that our entire social order is held together by this systemic oppression.
Are there particular groups that you are more concerned about than others? For example, the Liberal Party, as Terry Butler said earlier, is a group. Are there groups that you think are more dangerous?
There isn't a problem with groups. The problem is with assuming that the fundamental way that you should categorize people is with their group identity. Obviously, we all belong to groups. The issue is whether or not the individual identity is primary and the group identity is secondary, or the group identity is primary and the individual identity is secondary. If you're a proponent, for example, of equality of outcome, of quotas, then you de facto accept the proposition that it's the group identity that is primary, and there's all sorts of dangers that are associated with that that far outweigh whatever good you're likely to do.
Okay,
well, maybe you're just...
Yeah, it's good to see the audience clapping there. Hear, 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 hear. Now, this is absolutely key in understanding the leftist vision of identity politics is over and against the worldwide movement back to nation culture, custom, and tradition, which Peterson generally endorses. The key distinction that Peterson makes is between two kinds of equalities: an equality of opportunity versus an equality of outcome. An equality of opportunity involves guaranteeing that everyone has the same opportunities to advance themselves as society and as anyone else, while an equality of outcome involves guaranteeing that disadvantaged people, i.e. victims, are making those gains. So for Peterson, the notion of equality of outcome is the pernicious hallmark of leftist identity politics. And it's demonstrably catastrophic and morally monstrous in its historical manifestations because it always involves an unequal equalizer. It always involves some kind of governing elite who engineer society in accordance with their own whims, all the while recusing themselves from the very social engineering rules they impose on others. Remember, freedom of opportunity is going to inevitably give us unequal outcomes. Everyone's free to apply to, the institution, but only some are going to get in. And inevitably, in an equality of outcome approach, as we've seen with university-based affirmative action programs and racial quotas, inevitably, some people are going to be held to higher standards than others solely based on their racial identities. But not everyone sees it that way. Peterson happens to be sitting next to someone who sees this leftist vision of equality far differently than he does, and he is about to find out. First, gang, make sure to click on that link below and protect yourself and your loved ones from these insane leftist elites by protecting your assets with the timeless value of gold and silver. As you know, patriots over the centuries have always relied on gold and silver to protect their assets during economic storms, and that is where the amazing patriots over at Goldco come in. If you have $50,000 or more in an IRA, 401k, or savings account, you need to protect those assets from bumbling Biden's insanity with the timeless value of gold and silver. Click on that link below. Talk to our good friends over at Goldco. They're patriots just like us, gang, and they want you to succeed so much. They're offering you, get this, up to $10,000 in free silver if you open up an account with them. But that is a limited time offer, so don't wait. Click on that link below or visit my special website, turleytalkslikesgold.com.
Or maybe you just think that representative democracy should be representative. Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
Well, I do believe that women should have... I don't understand your question, I guess.
I guess you don't. That's pretty obvious, unfortunately.
Well, how about if you phrase it more clearly instead of just insulting me? Look at it this way. Let's talk about quotas for a minute. So there's a very wide array of jobs that are fundamentally done by men. So, for example,
Member of Parliament,
99.9% of
sorry, Alex, I'm going to
bricklayers.
stop sledging you now, I promise.
I'm happy to give my minute to Jordan.
Stop. I mean, that was so utterly rude. If you don't know, that's a woman by the name of Terry Butler. She's a former member of Parliament there in Australia, far leftist. And that was her way of signaling to Peterson that what he had to say wasn't important. It's not worth anyone's time listening to it. She'd rather make silly little middle school age comments to someone else than listen to carefully reasoned argument. That is the definition of a blind ideologue.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels? Why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay, so let's just pause and...
yeah, but that's because it's power.
You pose a question to Terry Butler. Go ahead and answer it, then we'll hear from the other panellists.
His question to me?
Well, yeah, if you'd, if you'd like to answer the question about bricklayers...
There's nothing wrong with bricklayers.
Why there are no quotas in
She couldn't answer. Peterson laid out a thoroughly rational argument against equality of outcome measures, and she literally had no idea how to even begin answering him. And did you catch the inconsistency on her part in her muttering there? The leftist view is that our society is systemically bigoted. It's systemically racist, sexist, and all kinds of phobic. And so what Peterson just did there is he found a field within this systemically bigoted society where such systemic accusations fall apart, Why aren't you talking about bricklayers when it comes to equal outcome? I mean, the same could be said of the prison population, which is 93% men. Same with sanitation workers, 82% men. But note the inconsistency in her response. Her response was to retreat back to a single aspect of society, namely parliamentary representation. Who cares about bricklayers? I'm talking about parliament, positions of power. In other words, I'm no longer talking about the social system as a whole, which of course undermines the whole thesis of the left. If the system as a whole isn't inherently unequal, then there's no rationale for implementing measures designed to bring about an outcome equality for which there is no need. Peterson perfectly pelted her with this. This isn't about equality or equity. This is about power. It's about leftists attaining the power to change the system that more empowers them. That's what this is ultimately about. It's about achieving the power to remake the world in accordance with the whims of a very few. And fortunately, with thinkers like Peterson, those whims will ultimately go unrealized. As always, make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You'll definitely want to check out my latest video on Jordan Peterson leaving atheist Sam Harris absolutely speechless on God. You're not going to want to miss it, so make sure to click on the link, and I'll see you over there. God bless.